never thought I'd completely change who I was for a man, but that's exactly what I did when I met Travis. He was everything my ex-boyfriends weren't: stable, kind, and traditional. So when he mentioned he was saving himself for marriage, I panicked and lied, claiming I was doing the same. What started as a small fib snowballed into a complete identity makeover, hiding my past OnlyFans account I'd used to pay bills after losing my job. For 2 years, I maintained this perfect good girl image even as we got engaged. Everything was going according to plan until my wedding reception, when my drunk best friend Natalie raised her glass and loudly asked if I remembered my OnlyFans days. In that moment, as 200 guests went silent and Travis's hand went cold in mine, my carefully built life shattered. I never thought I'd be the type of girl to completely reinvent myself for a man. But here I am, sitting in the aftermath of my own wedding disaster, wondering how it all went so spectacularly wrong. My name is Valencia Moretti. I'm 29, and 2 years ago I met the man who would become my husband. A man who had absolutely no idea who I really was until my so-called best friend Natalie decided to get champagne wasted and blow up my entire life with one sentence. Travis wasn't even my usual type. He was handsome enough, I guess, but not the kind of guy I'd normally give a second glance. Button-down shirts tucked into khakis, a sensible mid-sized sedan, that kind of squeaky clean vibe that usually made me roll my eyes. We met at this professional development seminar where the instructor paired us up for some teamwork exercise, but there was something weirdly appealing about how put together he seemed, like the complete opposite of every chaotic, emotionally unavailable guy I dated before. Our first date was at this little cafe where he talked about his 5-year career plan and his volunteer work at his church's youth group. He mentioned his parents, who'd been married for 34 years, and casually dropped that he was taking relationships seriously and waiting for the right person. That's when it clicked what kind of guy Travis was. Traditional, old-fashioned values. And honestly, in that moment, I saw a future I never thought I'd have. Stability, security, a partner who wouldn't bail when things got tough. So when he started talking about his beliefs on physical intimacy and saving yourself for marriage, I nodded along like that had been my philosophy all along, too. The words just came out of my mouth. I think there's something really special about waiting. I've learned from past mistakes. Look, I'm not proud of what I did next, but in that moment it felt like my one shot at something real. When he asked about my past relationships, I gave him the sanitized version. I conveniently left out the string of bad decisions with worse guys, and, most importantly, that year I spent on OnlyFans trying to pay off my credit card debt after getting laid off from my marketing job. It wasn't even that successful. I made maybe $10,000 over the whole year showing off for strangers online. My friends Natalie and Jenna had actually pushed me to try it. Easy money, they said. Everyone's doing it these days, they said. And when I shut it down and deleted everything a year later, they acted like it was no big deal, just another crazy story for girls' night. My parents never knew, thank God. I'd moved on, put it behind me. It was a desperate phase of my life I wasn't proud of, but the longer Travis and I dated, the deeper the lie became. 3 dates in, when things were heating up on his couch, I pulled away and fed him some line about wanting to wait and doing it right this time. The look of respect in his eyes made me feel simultaneously special and absolutely terrible. But also it bought me time. Because the truth, I wasn't even that physically attracted to him at first. He was nice looking, but there wasn't that immediate chemistry I'd had with other guys. His kindness, his stability, that was attractive in a different way. I figured the physical stuff would develop over time, and playing the waiting card gave me space to let those feelings grow. 6 months in, I'd constructed this whole fake persona, Valencia 2.0, the reformed good girl who'd learned from past mistakes without ever specifying what those mistakes were. Travis would look at me with such admiration, telling me how refreshing it was to find someone with values in today's world. Each time the guilt would hit me like a truck, but I'd push it down. I was different now, wasn't I? That OnlyFans girl wasn't the real me. This was the real me, the version I was meant to be. My friends thought I was absolutely losing it. "You're seriously not sleeping with him?" Natalie would ask, 3 wines in at our monthly girls' night, the same girl who once, and I'd cut her off, giving her that "shut up now or I'll kill you" look. Jenna was more understanding, but still warned me. "Val, you're building this relationship on quicksand. What happens when he finds out?" I'd brush it off, saying he never would. That my OnlyFans was deleted, that no one save for our small friend group even knew about it. The worst part? As time went on, I actually did fall completely in love with him. The attraction I'd been unsure about in the beginning grew into something real. His kindness, his consistency, the way he remembered tiny details about things I liked, it all added up. By the time we were engaged, I was genuinely head over heels, which made the lie even harder to untangle. How could I tell him, 6 months before our wedding, that our entire relationship was built on a foundation of deception? So I doubled down. Wedding planning became my distraction from the guilt. Every time his sweet, traditional mother talked about how happy she was that her son had found such a good girl, I'd smile through the knife twist of shame in my stomach. Every time Travis's dad made some comment about kids these days having no values, I'd nod along like I wasn't exactly the kind of person he was criticizing. As the months passed, containing my carefully crafted persona became like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming swords. Travis and I settled into a comfortable rhythm of date nights, weekend hiking trips, and Sunday dinners with his family. His parents adored me, especially his mom, who once tearfully told me how grateful she was that her son had found a woman with values in this day and age. I smiled through gritted teeth, the guilt churning in my stomach. The physical stuff was complicated. I'd initially used the waiting excuse, partly because I wasn't super attracted to Travis at first, but as we got closer emotionally, that changed. Now I genuinely wanted him, but I'd painted myself into a corner with this whole purity act. Our makeout sessions would get heated, then I'd pump the brakes, playing the role of the conflicted good girl. "I want to wait," I'd whisper, like some character from a faith-based romance novel. Travis would nod respectfully, telling me how much he admired my conviction. Meanwhile, my body screamed at me for being an idiot, while my conscience reminded me what a terrible person I was. The close calls with my past were the worst. Like when we ran into Tyler at the mall, this guy who'd been one of my more enthusiastic OnlyFans subscribers. He did a double take, staring at me with this weird mix of confusion and recognition. Aren't you? I cut him off with a quick, "Sorry, you must have me confused with someone else," and practically dragged Travis to another store. Later, Travis asked if I knew that guy, and I muttered something about creepy men and changed the subject. Then there was the night Travis was helping me organize my laptop files and almost clicked on an old folder where I'd stupidly saved some backup content from my OnlyFans days. I practically lunged across the couch to grab my computer, making up some nonsense about private work documents. The confused look on his face haunted me for days. The closer we got to the wedding date, the more suffocating my web of lies became. Travis's family had fully embraced me, which somehow made everything worse. His mom included me in all these family traditions, showing me their heirloom wedding veil, teaching me his grandmother's recipes, telling me how excited she was for grandchildren, all while looking at me like I was this perfect addition to their family. If she only knew. The bachelorette weekend was when things really started unraveling. Jenna had planned this tasteful spa weekend at a mountain resort, very appropriate for my new good girl image. But after a few too many drinks on the first night, Natalie started in on me. "So, is Travis getting the same virgin bride act you gave that guy from your political science class junior year?" She snorted, loud enough that some of my cousins definitely heard. I dragged her out onto the balcony of our suite, furious. "What is your problem?" I hissed. "Are you trying to ruin everything?" Natalie looked genuinely confused. "I thought they knew. You've been friends with these girls forever." "These are my cousins, not our college friends. Nobody here knows about that time in my life, and I'd like to keep it that way." That's when Natalie's expression changed from confused to angry. Are you seriously still playing this role, Val? You're about to marry this guy. He doesn't even know who you really are. He knows the real me, I insisted, the me I am now. Oh, please. Natalie rolled her eyes. The real you isn't some pearl-clutching prude who's saving herself. You're building your entire marriage on a lie. It's not a lie. I've changed. People change. Changing is one thing. Completely fabricating a past is another. She paused, studying my face. Does he know anything about your real life? The OnlyFans year? Any of it? When I didn't answer, she shook her head in disbelief. He deserves to know who he's actually marrying. We barely spoke the rest of the weekend, maintaining a frosty civility for everyone else's sake. When Natalie left early claiming a work emergency, I was actually relieved. One night, about 3 weeks before the wedding, Travis brought up our honeymoon. We were cuddled on the couch, and he shyly mentioned how excited he was to finally be together in every way. He'd been so patient, so respectful of my boundaries, and there I was, mentally panicking about how I'd fake the inexperience he expected. I'd gotten so tangled in my own lies that I was now stressing about how to pretend to be bad at something I actually knew how to do. During the rehearsal dinner, Travis's dad gave this heartfelt toast about how proud he was of his son for waiting for the right woman and staying true to his values. Then he turned to me with tears in his eyes, talking about how he and his wife had prayed for years that Travis would find someone who shared his convictions. I smiled through it, champagne glass trembling in my hand while Natalie stared daggers at me from across the table. Later that night, Natalie cornered me in the bathroom. "Tomorrow's your last chance to come clean before you say your vows," she said quietly. "This isn't fair to him, Val." "It's none of your business," I replied. "And don't you dare say anything to him. This is my life." "It's his life, too," she shot back, "and you're letting him make a lifetime commitment without all the facts." I walked away, telling myself she was just being dramatic, that in the grand scheme of things, my past didn't matter, that it was too late now anyway. What was I supposed to do? Confess the night before our wedding? I went to bed that night feeling both excited and terrified about the next day. In less than 24 hours, I'd be Mrs. Travis Mitchell. My new life would officially begin, and my past would be firmly behind me. Or so I thought. My wedding day started like a fairy tale. Perfect weather, hair and makeup artists working their magic, my mom crying happy tears as she helped me into my dress. Even Natalie seemed to have put aside our disagreement, showing up with the other bridesmaids to help with all the little details and actually behaving herself. For a few blissful hours, I forgot about the sword hanging over my head and just enjoyed being a bride. The ceremony was everything I dreamed of. Walking down the aisle toward Travis, seeing his eyes light up when he saw me. I'd never felt so loved, so sure that I was exactly where I was meant to be. We exchanged traditional vows, promising honesty and faithfulness to each other. If I faltered slightly on the honesty part, no one noticed. As we sealed our marriage with a kiss, I told myself that the past was officially behind me. From this moment on, I was Mrs. Travis Mitchell, and nothing else mattered. Then came the reception, our entrance as husband and wife, our first dance, the father-daughter dance that left everyone misty-eyed, the cake cutting, all those milestone moments playing out exactly as planned. I actually started to relax, thinking I'd made it through, that my past would stay buried where it belonged. I should have known better. Dinner was winding down when the DJ announced it was time for toasts. Travis's best man went first with a sweet, slightly awkward speech about their friendship since college. My dad followed with an emotional tribute that had me dabbing at my mascara. And then it was Natalie's turn as maid of honor. She approached the microphone with a slight wobble in her step, 5 or 6 champagnes in, if I had to guess. Still, she started off okay, talking about our friendship since freshman year of college, embarrassing stories from our dorm days, how happy she was to see me find someone who cherished me. Standard maid of honor fare. I began to relax, thinking we were in the clear. Then her speech took a turn. "But what I really want to talk about," Natalie continued, her words slightly slurred, "is how far Valencia has come. We've been through so much together. The good times, the bad times, that period after she got laid off when things got really tough." My stomach dropped as I recognized where this was heading. I shot her a warning look, but she was too far gone to notice or care. "I've watched her transform into this whole different person," she continued, waving her champagne glass for emphasis. "Like, remember when you were so broke after that marketing job fell through when me and Jenna convinced you to try OnlyFans?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Travis's hand tensed in mine. "And now look at you, all saving yourself for marriage." She did literal air quotes, slashing champagne onto the floor. The room went dead silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as 200 pairs of eyes swiveled between Natalie and me. Travis had gone completely still beside me, his face a mask of confusion, turning rapidly to understanding. "What is she talking about?" he whispered, his voice tight. Before I could respond, Natalie plowed ahead, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. "I just want to say I'm proud of you for reinventing yourself and finding happiness," she slurred, as if she was genuinely trying to give a compliment. "Even if some of us think maybe total honesty would have been—" Thank God for Jenna, who finally managed to get to the microphone and gently pry it from Natalie's hand. "I think that's enough reminiscing," she said with a forced laugh. "Let's give it up for the beautiful couple." Scattered, uncomfortable applause followed as the DJ quickly started playing music, but the damage was done. I became acutely aware of Travis's parents at the next table, looking between their son and me with shocked expressions. Travis himself had let go of my hand and was staring at me with devastation in his eyes. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. I couldn't speak. Instead, I burst into tears, which was answer enough. The look on his face shattered me. It wasn't just anger or shock. It was the complete dissolution of trust. Somehow, we made it through the rest of the reception. Travis put on a brave face for the guests, standing beside me with a rigid smile that never reached his eyes. He answered congratulations with mechanical thanks, avoided his parents' questioning glances, and didn't look at me once. I moved through the rest of the evening in a fog of humiliation and dread, making excuses for Natalie to anyone who dared to ask. The door to our honeymoon suite had barely closed before Travis turned to me, his expression raw with hurt. "I need you to tell me the truth," he said, his voice eerily calm. "All of it." "It's not what you think," I started, but the look on his face stopped me cold. "Don't," he said. "Don't lie to me, not anymore. Was what Natalie said true?" "Yes," I whispered, "but it was years ago, before I met you. And you were showing yourself to strangers for money." Each word fell like a stone. We talked in circles for hours, or rather, Travis asked questions that I couldn't answer satisfactorily, and I made increasingly desperate attempts to justify my deception. "I don't even know who you are," he said quietly. "The woman I thought I married doesn't exist. I'm still me," I pleaded. "I still love you. That part was never fake." He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" Around 3 a.m., Travis grabbed his overnight bag. "I can't do this right now," he said. "I need space to think." "Where are you going?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "It's our wedding night." "Is it?" he replied bitterly. "Because I'm pretty sure I just married a stranger." He paused at the door. "I'll be at my brother's. We can figure out whatever this is after I've had some time to process." As the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the bed in my rumpled wedding dress and sobbed until I had nothing left. In the space of a few hours, I'd gone from blushing bride to abandoned wife, and the worst part? I knew it was entirely my own fault. Travis didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. Our honeymoon to Maui went unused, 2 first-class tickets to paradise, gathering dust on the nightstand. I spent those days alternating between leaving desperate voicemails, crying until I was dehydrated, and fielding concerned calls from friends and family who'd witnessed the reception disaster. I told my parents a sanitized version of events, that Travis was upset about some things from my past that had come to light. I couldn't bear to tell them the whole truth. 5 days after the wedding, Travis finally agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, like he'd aged years in less than a week. I probably didn't look much better. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said after we'd sat in awkward silence with our untouched coffees, "and I've talked to my pastor, my parents, my brother. Everyone has an opinion about what I should do." My heart hammered in my chest. "And what do you think?" He sighed deeply. "I think we rushed into this. I think I never really knew you, and I think you never respected me enough to be honest." "That's not true," I protested. "I respected you so much that I was afraid of losing you. I knew what kind of woman you wanted, and "That's exactly my point," he interrupted. "You created this perfect version of yourself that you thought I wanted instead of just being real with me and letting me decide if we were compatible. You took away my agency, Valencia. You decided for me that I couldn't handle the truth about who you really were. Put that way, it sounded even worse." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never thought of it like that." "That's because you were too busy thinking about yourself," he said bluntly. "About what you wanted, about the future you thought you deserved, regardless of what it cost to get there." His words stung, but they weren't wrong. I'd been selfish, focused entirely on securing the stability and respectability I craved, regardless of the deception required. "So what happens now?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Travis stared into his coffee. "I don't know. I'm angry. I feel betrayed. But I also made vows 5 days ago, and I don't take those lightly." He finally looked up at me. "I think we need time apart, and if we decide to try to make this work, we'll need counseling. A lot of it." It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it wasn't a flat-out rejection either. "Whatever you need," I agreed quickly. "I'll do anything." "That's the thing, Valencia. I don't want you to do anything. I want you to be yourself, your actual self, not some character you think I want. I need to know who I'm really married to before I can decide if this marriage has a chance." So began the strangest newlywed period in history. Travis moved back into his old apartment while I stayed in the condo we'd picked out together. We started seeing a marriage counselor twice a week, a neutral third party who helped us navigate the wreckage of our foundation. In those sessions, layer by layer, I revealed the real me to Travis. Not just the OnlyFans chapter, but all the messy, complicated parts of my life I'd hidden away. My actual views on intimacy, which were far more nuanced than the black and white version I'd presented. My initial lack of physical attraction to him. My desperate desire for stability after years of chaos. It was excruciating, like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. Every revelation risked pushing him further away, but the counselor reminded us both that without complete honesty now, we had no chance of moving forward. For his part, Travis listened more than he spoke. Sometimes he'd ask clarifying questions, his face carefully neutral. Other times he'd just shake his head in disbelief. After particularly difficult sessions, he'd disappear for days, processing what he'd learned. I lived in constant fear that each new truth would be the one that made him file for annulment. 3 months after our wedding day disaster, we had a breakthrough of sorts. After a session where I'd finally confessed my initial calculation in dating him, how I'd seen him as safe husband material rather than someone I was genuinely attracted to, Travis actually laughed. "You know what's ironic?" he said as we walked to our separate cars. "If you'd just been honest from the start about your past and who you really were, I probably would have still dated you. I might have had some issues to work through about the OnlyFans thing, sure, but what I wanted wasn't some perfect traditional woman. It was someone authentic who shared my core values of honesty and commitment. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. All this time, all this deception, for nothing? "So you might have accepted me as I was?" I asked, stunned. "We'll never know, will we?" he replied, a hint of sadness in his smile. "You never gave me the chance to choose." 6 months after our wedding, Travis moved back in. We were nowhere near healed. Trust like that takes years to rebuild if it ever fully returns. But we were trying. Some days were better than others. The physical part of our relationship was awkward at first, both of us hyper-aware of the lies that had defined our early intimacy. But slowly, something new and more authentic began to emerge between us. Travis's family was another matter. His mother, in particular, remained cool toward me, unable to forget how I'd deceived her son. I couldn't blame her. I'd have felt the same way in her position. Travis assured me they'd come around eventually, but I wasn't sure I believed him. As for Natalie, our friendship survived. Barely. After weeks of avoiding her calls, I finally agreed to meet. She apologized for the way the truth came out, but not for believing Travis deserved to know. "I was wrong to blurt it out like that," she admitted, "but you were wrong to build your relationship on lies." I couldn't argue with her logic, though part of me still resented her for the public humiliation. Looking back now, a year into this strange marriage built on the ashes of deception, I still don't know if we'll make it long term. The foundation is cracked, maybe irreparably. Sometimes I catch Travis looking at me with uncertainty in his eyes, like he's still trying to figure out who I really am. And sometimes I wonder if I even know the answer to that question myself. What I do know is that you can't outrun your past. You can't build something genuine on a foundation of lies, no matter how convenient those lies might seem in the moment. And the person you hurt most when you pretend to be someone you're not is yourself. If I could go back and do it all differently, would I? Part of me wants to say yes. Absolutely. I'd be honest from the start, even if it meant losing Travis. But another part, the brutally honest part I'm still getting to know, isn't so sure. Because the truth is, I got what I wanted. The stable life, the respectable husband, the second chance at being someone better than I was before. I just never realized how high the price would be, or that I'd still be paying it day after day in the currency of broken trust. Travis would probably have forgiven me eventually for having an OnlyFans account. What he couldn't forgive was the elaborate deception, the calculated way I'd constructed a completely fictional version of myself to match what I thought he wanted. As our counselor kept reminding us both, the issue wasn't my past. It was the breach of trust. Trust is like a mirror, she told us during one particularly intense session. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but you'll always see the cracks in the reflection. I desperately wanted to believe we could rebuild that mirror, somehow restore what we'd lost on our wedding night. But during those early months of separation, there were days when even I couldn't see a way forward. The hardest part was facing Travis's family. His parents had welcomed me so warmly into their lives, treated me like a daughter even before we were married. Now his mother could barely look me in the eye. I ran into her at the grocery store about 2 months after the wedding, and the awkward conversation that followed was excruciating. "Valencia," she said stiffly, her cart stopped alongside mine in the produce section. "Mrs. Mitchell," I replied, feeling myself shrink under her gaze. "How have you been?" "Managing," she answered. There was a long pause before she added, "Travis tells me you're in counseling." "Yes, twice a week. We're really trying to—" "He's a good man," she interrupted. "All he ever wanted was someone honest." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I know. Do you?" Her eyes were sharp. "Because I'm not sure you understand what you've done. My son believed in you completely." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I never meant to hurt him. I just wanted to trap him," she finished for me. "To make him fall in love with someone who doesn't exist." "That's not true," I protested weakly. "I do love him." She gave me a long, evaluating look. "Maybe you do. But love without honesty isn't enough, Valencia. It never has been." She maneuvered her cart around mine and walked away, leaving me standing there with tears streaming down my face in front of the organic tomatoes. The next time I saw her was at a counseling session Travis had asked his parents to attend. Our therapist thought it might help to have an open conversation about expectations and family dynamics. But sitting across from Travis's parents in those uncomfortable office chairs, I felt like I was on trial. We raised our son to value truthfulness above all else, his father explained, his voice measured but firm. When Valencia presented herself as someone with traditional values similar to his own, we were thrilled. We thought he'd found his match. And had she been honest from the beginning, our counselor asked? If Valencia had been forthright about her past from the start? His father glanced at his wife before answering. We wouldn't have judged her for past mistakes if she'd been honest about them. Everyone deserves grace and second chances. What concerns us is the pattern of deception. It wasn't just one lie, his mother added. It was a daily choice to maintain a false persona for 2 years. That takes commitment. She wasn't wrong. Maintaining my good girl act had required constant vigilance, monitoring what I said, how I dressed, who I associated with. I'd stopped hanging out with certain friends because their stories about our past might contradict my carefully constructed narrative. I deleted social media accounts, changed my music preferences, even altered the way I laughed at certain jokes. The Valencia that Travis fell in love with was a performance so thorough, I sometimes forgot I was acting. "Valencia," our counselor prompted gently, "would you like to respond to that?" I took a deep breath. "You're right," I said, looking directly at Travis's mother. I made 1,000 small choices to hide who I really was. At first, it was just about making a good impression, but then I fell in love with Travis, and I was terrified of losing him if he knew the truth. "So you lied to keep him," his father stated flatly. "Yes," I admitted, and I understand now how selfish that was. I took away his right to choose whether he wanted the real me or not. Travis, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "I think what hurts the most is that you didn't trust me to love the real you. You decided for me that I couldn't handle your past, so you never gave me the chance." His words landed like a physical blow because they were absolutely true. I'd never trusted Travis with the authentic version of myself. I'd assumed he'd reject the real me, so I'd created a counterfeit version I thought he'd accept. "I want to now," I said quietly. "I want to give you that chance, if you still want it." The room fell silent. Travis looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not quite forgiveness, but not complete rejection either. "I think I do," he finally said. His parents exchanged a glance, and I could see they had serious reservations, but they respected their son's decision enough to keep their concerns to themselves. That session marked a turning point in our rocky reconciliation process. Travis started spending more time at our condo, sometimes staying overnight. We began the awkward process of getting to know each other all over again, this time with no filters or fabrications. I stopped pretending to be interested in activities I secretly found boring. I shared my actual opinions about politics, religion, and social issues. Opinions that were far more nuanced and sometimes more progressive than the conservative viewpoints I'd feigned. I played him the music I actually loved, showed him the movies that had shaped me, and introduced him to friends I'd kept separate from our relationship. To my surprise, Travis seemed almost energized by discovering these new facets of my personality. He'd occasionally shake his head in bemusement when I'd say something particularly contrary to my former persona, but there was often a smile behind the headshake. "You know," he said one night as we were cooking dinner together, "some of these real opinions of yours are actually more interesting than the agreeable ones you made up." I looked up from the vegetables I was chopping. "Really?" "Yeah, the fake Valencia never challenged me on anything. She just nodded and smiled at whatever I said, even when I suspect now that she disagreed completely. I was afraid you wouldn't like someone who challenged you." He set down his spoon and turned to face me. "Valencia, I grew up in a house where my parents debated everything from politics to what color to paint the living room. I never wanted a yes woman. I wanted a partner. The physical side of our relationship took longer to find its footing. There was an awkwardness now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. The artificial boundaries I'd established during our dating and engagement were gone, but they'd been replaced by a new tension. The knowledge that I'd been lying about my experience and comfort levels all along. Our first time together after reconciling was almost comically uncomfortable. We were both so inside our own heads, so hyper-aware of the context surrounding this moment, that natural connection seemed impossible. Afterward, lying side by side in awkward silence, I'd worried that this might be the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. But then Travis had turned to me with a rueful smile. That was pretty terrible, wasn't it? The unexpected honesty caught me off guard, and I'd laughed. A genuine, unfiltered laugh that felt like the first real moment between us in ages. Yeah, I admitted. Spectacularly bad. Maybe we need to stop thinking so much and just be, he suggested. How do we do that? I have no idea, he said. And suddenly we were both laughing, the tension broken. It got better after that. Not perfect, but better, more authentic. We stopped performing for each other and started communicating instead, talking about what we actually wanted, what felt good, what didn't. The intimacy that developed wasn't what I'd fantasized about during our engagement, but it was real. And that made it more meaningful than any romantic ideal I'd constructed. Rebuilding trust in other areas proved more challenging. Travis still checked my phone sometimes, his eyes lingering on text notifications or social media alerts. He'd ask probing questions about where I'd been or who I'd talked to, not in a controlling way, but with a wariness that suggested he was constantly braced for the next revelation, the next hidden truth. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, I'd earned his suspicion. But after 6 months of this tentative reconciliation, the constant sense of being monitored was wearing me down. "Do you think you'll ever fully trust me again?" I asked during a quiet moment at home, both of us reading on opposite ends of the couch. Travis looked up from his book, considering the question. "I want to," he said finally, "but you don't know if you can." "It's not that simple," he said, setting his book aside. "Trust isn't just a decision you make once. It's rebuilt through consistent actions over time. And I haven't been consistent enough." "You have been, recently. But 2 years of lies versus 6 months of honesty, the math isn't in your favor yet." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand." Travis sighed. "Look, Valencia, I'm trying, we both are, but there are still moments when I look at you and wonder if I really know you, or if this is just another version you're playing to keep me around." His honesty hurt, but I appreciated it. The old me would have twisted myself into knots trying to be whatever I thought would make him stay. The new me, the real me, needed to know where we actually stood. "What can I do?" I asked. "To help you see that this is the real me?" He thought for a moment. "Just keep being honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And maybe we need to spend some time with people who knew you before me, people who know the real Valencia." That's how we ended up having dinner with Natalie and her boyfriend the following weekend. I hadn't seen much of Natalie since the wedding disaster. Our friendship had survived, technically, but it existed mostly through occasional text exchanges and polite birthday wishes on social media. Having her back in my home, sitting across the dinner table from my husband, felt surreal. The evening started off painfully awkward. None of us quite knew how to address the elephant in the room, but after a glass of wine, Natalie reverted to her usual blunt self. "So," she said, looking between Travis and me, "are we pretending the wedding reception never happened, or can we talk about it?" I nearly choked on my drink, but Travis actually laughed. "I think we can talk about it." Natalie nodded. "Good, because I need to apologize to both of you, not for wanting the truth to come out. That needed to happen, but for the way it happened. Getting drunk and blurting it out in front of everyone was pretty much the worst possible way to handle it." "Pretty much," Travis agreed dryly. "I was worried about you both," she continued. "Val was building this relationship on quicksand, and you were marrying someone without knowing some pretty significant things about her past." "I appreciate the concern," Travis said, surprising me with his sincerity, though the timing could have been better. "Yeah, well, subtlety has never been my strong suit," Natalie replied with a self-deprecating smile. "But for what it's worth, the Val you're seeing now, this is the real one, the girl I've known since college. Not perfect, sometimes a mess, but genuine." Travis glanced at me, something softening in his expression. "I'm getting to know her," he said. and I think I like her." The evening got easier after that. Natalie shared stories from our college days, some embarrassing, some touching, all authentic. She talked about how I'd helped her through a difficult breakup, how I'd organized a fundraiser for her mom's cancer treatment, how I'd always been the friend who showed up when needed. In her stories, I recognized myself. Not the sanitized version I'd presented to Travis, but not a villain either. Just a complex, flawed human being who sometimes made poor choices, but also had moments of genuine goodness. By the end of the night, when Travis and I were cleaning up after our guests had left, something felt different between us. A shift too subtle to name, but significant nonetheless. "Thank you for tonight," I said as we loaded the dishwasher. "For what specifically? For being willing to hear those stories, for trying to see the real me through someone else's eyes." Travis handed me a glass to place in the rack. It helped, actually. Hearing Natalie talk about you, the good and the bad, made you seem more real to me, more human. As opposed to either the perfect girl I thought I married or the calculating liar I feared you might be after I found out the truth. He closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. "Neither of those extremes is actually you, is it?" I shook my head. "No, I'm somewhere in the messy middle, like most people." "The messy middle," he repeated thoughtfully. "I think I can work with that." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually make it. The messy middle became our new normal. Some days felt like genuine progress, moments of connection and honesty that gave me hope for our future. Other days, the weight of what I'd done would resurface, bringing with it all the guilt and uncertainty I'd been trying to outrun. 9 months after our wedding, we had our first major fight as a reconciled couple. It started innocuously enough. Travis came home from work and noticed a notification on my laptop screen from an old email account he didn't recognize. It was nothing suspicious, just a promotional email from a clothing brand I used to shop at, but seeing an unfamiliar email address triggered all his dormant insecurities. "What's this?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral but his body language tense. I glanced up from the dinner I was preparing. "Oh, that's just an old email I hardly use anymore. I must have logged in to look for a receipt or something. You've never mentioned this account before." "I didn't think it was important," I said, turning back to the stove. "It's just an old personal account from before we met." Travis was quiet for a moment, and I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the familiar tightening of tension that signaled we were entering dangerous territory. "What else haven't you mentioned because you didn't think it was important?" he finally asked. I set down my spoon and turned to face him. "Travis, it's just an email account. Not everything I don't specifically mention is some big secret I'm keeping from you." "How am I supposed to know that?" His voice rose slightly. "You managed to hide an entire part of your life from me for 2 years. You're really good at deciding what I don't need to know." The accusation stung, partly because it contained a kernel of truth. I had gotten very good at compartmentalizing, at determining what information to share and what to withhold, but I'd been working so hard to break that pattern, to be completely transparent about even the smallest things. "That's not fair," I said, feeling my own temper rise. "I've been completely honest with you for months now. I've answered every question, shared every thought, turned myself inside out, trying to prove that I'm not hiding anything anymore. Except old email accounts, apparently. It's an email account, not a secret family in Idaho," I snapped. "Why don't you just say what you're really thinking? You still don't trust me, and you probably never will." Travis ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I'm thinking is that normal couples don't have to deal with this. Normal couples don't constantly wonder if their spouse is lying about fundamental aspects of who they are. Normal couples," I repeated, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Right, and we'll never be that, will we? Because no matter what I do, no matter how honest I am from now until forever, you'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop." He didn't deny it, which somehow hurt more than any accusation. "Maybe this was a mistake," I said quietly. "Maybe some things are just too broken to fix." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Travis looked like I'd physically struck him. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "To give up?" "No," I admitted, "but I don't want to spend the rest of my life being punished for the same mistake either." Travis was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, measured. "I'm going to take a walk. I need to clear my head." He grabbed his jacket and left without another word, leaving me standing in our kitchen, wondering if I'd just destroyed whatever fragile progress we'd made. He came back 2 hours later, by which time I'd moved through anger, to anxiety, to a numb sort of resignation. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at a book I wasn't actually reading, when I heard his key in the lock. Travis sat down on the opposite end of the couch, his expression serious but no longer angry. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were right. I overreacted about the email, and that wasn't fair to you." I set my book down. "I could have mentioned it before. I understand why it might have seemed suspicious." "No, that's just it," he said, shaking his head. "An old email account isn't suspicious. Not in a normal relationship. And you were right. I'm still looking for evidence that you're hiding something. Still waiting for you to slip up and reveal that this honesty is just another act." "It's not," I said softly. "I know. Or at least I should know by now." He shifted to face me more directly. "During my walk, I realized something. I've been asking you to prove yourself, to earn back my trust, but I haven't been doing the work to actually let myself trust you again." "What do you mean?" "Trust is a choice," he explained. "It's not just something that happens to you when someone proves they're trustworthy enough. At some point, you have to choose to trust again, even knowing you might get hurt." "And you haven't been able to make that choice," I said, understanding dawning. "I've been too afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I fully trust you again and you betray that trust, I won't recover from it a second time. So I've been keeping one foot out the door, emotionally speaking." His honesty was both painful and oddly comforting. At least we were finally acknowledging the elephant in the room. "Where does that leave us?" I asked. "I think we need some help," he said. "Not just counseling about what happened in the past, but help figuring out how to move forward, how to build something new instead of trying to repair something broken." That conversation led us to a weekend couples retreat specifically designed for marriages in crisis. It wasn't religious or spiritual, just practical tools for reconnecting and rebuilding trust. We were easily the youngest couple there. Most of the others were dealing with issues like infidelity after decades of marriage or reconnecting after their kids had left home. Initially, I felt out of place, wondering if our problems were too unique for this kind of generic approach. But as we worked through the exercises and listened to other couples' stories, I realized something important. The details of our situation might be unusual, but the core issues, trust, honesty, forgiveness, identity, were universal. One exercise in particular broke something open between us. We were asked to write letters to each other, answering the question, "What do you need me to understand about you?" We weren't supposed to focus on our problems or grievances, just on expressing who we truly were and what made us tick. I filled pages, writing about growing up with a father whose approval always seemed just out of reach, about the shame I'd felt when I'd lost my job and turned to OnlyFans out of financial desperation, about how I'd spent my whole life feeling like I needed to be someone else to be loved, the perfect daughter, the cool girlfriend, the traditional wife, about how terrified I still was that if Travis saw all of me, the real me with all my flaws and contradictions, he wouldn't stay. Travis's letter surprised me. He wrote about the pressure of being the good son in a traditional family, about how his decision to wait for marriage wasn't just about religious beliefs, but about a deep fear of being vulnerable, of giving someone that level of access to his heart before he was certain they wouldn't leave. He wrote about feeling like an imposter sometimes in his own life, wondering if he was truly as virtuous as everyone believed or if he was just good at following rules. And he wrote about how betrayed he felt when he discovered my deception, not just because I'd lied, but because in doing so, I denied him the chance to confront his own prejudices and maybe grow beyond them. When we exchanged letters and read them silently, I felt like I was truly seeing Travis for the first time. Not as the perfect traditional guy I'd initially categorized him as, but as a complex human being with his own insecurities and struggles. And from the way he looked at me after reading my letter, I think he was finally seeing me too. "I had no idea," he said quietly, "about your dad, about how you've always felt like you needed to be someone else." "I never told you," I admitted. "Not the real reasons, anyway. I wish you had. I might have understood." "Would you?" I asked. "If I'd told you on our third date that I'd done OnlyFans and that I often felt like I was playing a role to make people like me, would you really have stuck around?" He considered this. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The person I was then might have been too judgmental, too quick to categorize you based on that one detail. But I'd like to think I would have seen beyond it to who you really are." "And who is that?" I asked, because sometimes I'm not even sure anymore. Travis smiled slightly. "From what I can tell from your letter and these past months of getting to know the real you, you're resilient, you're adaptable. You care deeply about being loved and accepted. You're creative and resourceful, even if sometimes you channel those qualities in problematic ways." His smile widened. "And you make really good pasta carbonara." I laughed, grateful for the moment of lightness. "That's true. My carbonara is exceptional. The point is," he continued, "you're not defined by your mistakes or by the roles you've played. You're all of it. The good decisions and the bad ones, the honesty and the deception, the strength and the fear. And I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I can love all of those parts. Not just the perfect version I thought I married. It was the most hopeful I'd felt since our wedding day. Not because Travis was promising to forgive and forget. He wasn't, and that would have felt hollow anyway. But because for the first time, he was seeing me clearly and suggesting that he might be able to love what he saw. The retreat didn't magically fix everything, of course. We still had hard days. Travis's parents were still cautious around me, though they'd softened somewhat after seeing our genuine efforts to rebuild. My relationship with Natalie remained complicated. She'd been right about the lies being unsustainable. But the public way the truth had come out still created a barrier between us. But something fundamental had shifted. Instead of focusing on trying to recover what we'd lost, we were building something new. Something based on who we actually were, not who we'd pretended to be or expected the other to be. 12 months after our wedding, we decided to renew our vows, not in a big ceremony with family and friends, but just the two of us, standing on a beach at sunset with only the waves as witnesses. "I, Travis, take you, Valencia, the real Valencia, with all your complexities and contradictions, to be my wife," he said, holding both my hands in his. "I promise to keep choosing trust, even when it's scary, to see you clearly and love what I see, to grow with you rather than expecting. You to become someone else for me." My voice shook as I recited my own vows. "I, Valencia, take you, Travis, not as my perfect savior or the answer to all my problems, but as my partner and equal. I promise to be honest, even when the truth is difficult, to show you who I really am, not who I think you want me to be. To trust that your love is big enough to encompass all of me, not just my best parts." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the water, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not the false security of a carefully maintained facade, but the authentic calm that comes from being fully known and choosing to stay anyway. That night, as we lay tangled together in our hotel room, Travis traced patterns on my bare shoulder, his touch gentle and contemplative. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "That this is the beginning," he said. "Not a do-over or a second chance, but something entirely new. And that's okay with you? That we can't go back to how things were before?" He nodded. "More than okay. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward with the real you, not the illusion." I nestled closer to him, allowing myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to make it after all. Not because I'd successfully maintained a perfect performance, but because I'd finally found the courage to stop performing altogether. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once shattered, never quite reassembles the same way. But perhaps, like a mosaic, the pieces could form something beautiful in their new configuration, something stronger and more authentic than what had been broken. Our renewed vows marked the beginning of a new chapter, but like any real story, ours didn't suddenly transform into a fairy tale. Trust rebuilt is never quite the same as trust that was never broken. It's more like a bone that heals after a break, stronger at the mended place perhaps, but forever changed, carrying the memory of its fracture in its very structure. The second year of our marriage brought new challenges. Travis received a job offer in another state, a significant promotion that would advance his career in ways he'd always dreamed of. Before the wedding disaster, I would have simply agreed to move, subordinating my own preferences to maintain the perfect wife persona I'd created. But the real Valencia had opinions and concerns. "What about my job?" I asked when he first brought up the possibility. "I've just started to build something solid at the agency." After years of marketing jobs that never quite fit, I'd finally found a position that utilized my creativity while offering stability. "You could find something similar there," Travis suggested, "or maybe even transfer within your company." "And what if I don't want to?" The question hung between us, a test of our new dynamic. What if I like where I am professionally and don't want to start over? Travis was quiet for a moment, and I could almost see the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. His expectation that I would simply go along with his plans, my instinct to agree in order to keep the peace. But then he surprised me. "Then we need to figure this out together," he said. "My career matters, but so does yours. This has to work for both of us." We spent weeks weighing options, researching alternatives, having difficult conversations about priorities and compromises. In the end, Travis negotiated a hybrid arrangement that would require some travel but allow us to stay where we were. It wasn't the perfect solution for either of us, but it was one we'd reached together, as equals. "You know," he told me after finalizing the arrangement with his company, "before everything happened, I think I would have just accepted the offer and expected you to follow. I wouldn't have even considered that you might have valid reasons to stay. And I would have just agreed to move, even if it wasn't what I wanted," I admitted. "I'd have been so focused on being the supportive wife that I would have ignored my own needs completely." "So this mess actually made us better at being married?" he asked with a rueful smile. "Maybe," I said. "Or at least better at being honest about what we want and need." Those negotiations around the job offer represented a milestone in our recovery. For the first time since our wedding, we were facing a major life decision not as the people we'd pretended to be, but as our authentic selves, complex, sometimes contradictory, but genuine. The physical intimacy that had once been so complicated between us evolved too. Gone was the artificial constraint of waiting for marriage that had defined our early relationship, but so too was the awkward overcorrection that had characterized our first attempts after reconciling. In its place grew something more natural and comfortable, a connection based on mutual desire rather than performance or obligation. "It's ironic," Travis said one lazy Sunday morning as we lingered in bed. "When you were pretending to be saving yourself, I thought our wedding night would be this magical, perfect experience, but it was only after we broke apart and put ourselves back together that things actually got good between us. Because now it's real," I said, "not some fantasy version of what intimacy should be." He pulled me closer. "I prefer reality, even with all its complications." Of course, the legacy of my deception still surfaced at unexpected moments. Travis's parents gradually warmed to me again, but there remained an undercurrent of caution in our interactions. His mother, in particular, watched me with careful eyes during family gatherings, as if looking for signs that I might be playing a role rather than being myself. During their anniversary dinner, nearly 18 months after our wedding, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dessert. "You seem different these days," she observed, her tone neutral. "I am different," I acknowledged, continuing to slice the pie she'd baked. "Or rather, I'm more myself now." "And who is that exactly?" she asked. The girl from the wedding day or the one my son thought he was marrying? I set down the knife and turned to face her directly. Neither, Mrs. Mitchell. The girl from the wedding day was partly real but defined by her mistakes and desperation. The one Travis thought he was marrying was a fiction, a carefully constructed version of what I thought he and your family wanted. And now? Now I'm just trying to be authentic. Sometimes that means I'm a mess. Sometimes it means I don't fit neatly into the vision you had for your son's wife. But it's real, and that's what Travis and I both need. She was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up the plates I'd been filling with pie. Authenticity, she said, testing the word. I suppose that's a start. It wasn't wholehearted acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. And at this point in our journey, that felt like enough. Natalie and I gradually repaired our friendship too, though it never quite returned to what it had been. The wedding disaster had changed things between us permanently, but there was a new honesty in our interactions that hadn't existed before, a willingness to call each other out on our nonsense that ultimately made for a healthier relationship. You know what I've realized? She said during one of our coffee dates. I wasn't exactly innocent in all this. What do you mean? I'm the one who encouraged you to try OnlyFans when you were struggling financially, she pointed out. And then I acted all high and mighty when you didn't want to tell Travis about it. You were right that I should have been honest with him, I said. About the OnlyFans thing, sure. But you were also right that it wasn't my place to reveal it, especially not the way I did. She stirred her latte thoughtfully. I think part of me was jealous, you know? You were moving on to this perfect-seeming life with this perfect-seeming guy, and it felt like you were leaving behind our messy reality. Her confession surprised me. I had no idea you felt that way. Neither did I, not consciously, but looking back, I think that's why I was so aggressive about exposing what I saw as your hypocrisy. It wasn't just about honesty. It was about not wanting to be left behind. Her insight made me reconsider those tense pre-wedding interactions in a new light. I'd been so focused on maintaining my facade that I hadn't considered how my transformation might have affected my oldest friend. For what it's worth, she added, I like the real Valencia much better than the Stepford wife version you were turning into, and I think Travis does too, even if getting here nearly destroyed you both. She was right. Despite the painful journey, Travis and I had emerged with something more genuine than what we'd started with. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We still argued, still occasionally triggered each other's insecurities, still had to work through moments of doubt. But the foundation was solid in a way it never could have been when built on deception. 2 years after our wedding, we decided to try for a baby. The decision wasn't made lightly. We both knew that bringing a child into our lives would test our rebuilt relationship in countless new ways. But it also represented our faith in the future we were creating together. Are you sure we're ready? I asked Travis one night after we'd been trying for a few months. Given everything we've been through? He took my hand. I don't think anyone's ever truly ready for parenthood. But I do know that I want to build a family with you. The real you, not the version I thought I married. Even though that real version is complicated and messy and makes mistakes. Especially because of that, he said. What better lesson could we teach our child than the value of authenticity? That it's better to be honestly imperfect than perfectly false. When I discovered I was pregnant a few weeks later, the joy was tinted with a new kind of fear. Not just the normal anxieties of impending parenthood, but a deeper concern. What would we tell our child someday about how we met, about our wedding, about the lie that had nearly destroyed us? I shared this worry with Travis one evening as we sat on our porch swing, his hand resting gently on my still, flat stomach. I keep thinking about what we'll say when they're old enough to ask how we got together, I admitted. Do we tell them the truth? That their mother was a liar who created a completely false persona to trick their father into marriage? Travis was quiet for a moment. First of all, that's not an accurate summary of what happened. Yes, you created a false persona, but it wasn't just to trick me. You were trying to be the person you thought would be loved and accepted. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, but it makes it human. He shifted to look at me directly. And second, I think when the time comes, we tell them a version of the truth that they can understand at their age. That people sometimes make mistakes when they're afraid of not being loved for who they really are. That honesty is hard but vital. That forgiveness is possible, even after terrible betrayals. And that their parents aren't perfect but are trying their best, I added. Exactly. We'll tell them a story about two flawed people who found their way to something real, even if the path was messy, he smiled. Besides, can you imagine how insufferable our child would be if they thought they had perfect parents? We're doing them a favor by being such obvious works in progress. His perspective eased my anxiety, as it so often did these days. Travis had a gift for finding the truth in difficult situations without dwelling in judgment. It was one of the qualities I'd first been attracted to in him, even before I'd tangled everything up with lies. My pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as my body changed to accommodate our growing child, I found myself reflecting on all the transformations of the past few years. The Valencia who had first met Travis at that professional development seminar seemed like a different person entirely, desperate for stability, willing to become anyone to secure it. The woman I was now had learned the hard way that stability built on falsehood is no stability at all. During my 7th month, Travis's company held their annual holiday party. It was the first time many of his colleagues would meet me since our wedding, the disaster of which had inevitably become known through workplace gossip, despite Travis's attempts at discretion. "We don't have to go," he offered when he saw my hesitation about the invitation. "I can make an excuse." "No," I said, surprising myself with my conviction. "I want to go. I'm tired of hiding from what happened." The party was held at an elegant hotel downtown. As Travis helped me out of the car, my pregnant belly now impossible to disguise in my fitted dress, I felt a momentary flutter of the old anxiety, the fear of being exposed, of not measuring up to expectations. But I took a deep breath and let it pass. Inside, I could feel curious eyes on us as we made our way through the crowd. I caught snippets of whispered conversations, saw heads turn in our direction. Travis stayed close, his hand a steady presence at the small of my back. His boss approached us first, greeting Travis warmly before turning to me with undisguised curiosity. "And this must be the famous Valencia," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." The old me would have wondered anxiously what exactly he'd heard, would have immediately tried to present whatever version of herself seemed most likely to win approval. But the woman I'd become simply smiled and shook his hand. "Some of it might even be true," I replied lightly. He laughed, seeming surprised by my candor. "I like her," he told Travis. As the evening progressed, I found myself navigating conversations with a new kind of ease. I didn't try to be the perfect corporate wife or pretend to opinions I didn't hold. I spoke honestly about my work, my interests, my experiences of pregnancy. When someone made a veiled reference to our unusual wedding, I neither flinched nor pretended not to understand. Yes, it was certainly memorable, I acknowledged with a rueful smile, though perhaps not in the way we'd planned. Later, as we drove home, Travis reached over to take my hand. "You were amazing tonight," he said. "Just being yourself with everyone, even when it would have been easier to play a role." It actually wasn't easier, I realized aloud. Playing a role is exhausting. Being myself, even the imperfect, sometimes uncomfortable truth of myself, takes less energy. That's the irony, isn't it? All that effort to maintain a facade when authenticity was simpler all along. As we pulled into our driveway, I felt our baby kick, a strong little nudge as if in agreement. "I think our little one is team authenticity too," I said, placing Travis's hand where the movement had been. His face softened with wonder as he felt another kick. "Smart kid," he murmured, already figuring out what took us years to learn. Looking back at our journey now, I can see how far we've come from that catastrophic wedding reception. The path hasn't been straight or simple. There have been setbacks and difficult days, moments when the weight of my deception threatened to pull us under again. But with each challenge we've faced honestly, together the shadow of my lies has receded a little more. Do I regret what I did? The answer isn't as straightforward as it once seemed. I regret the hurt I caused Travis, the trust I violated, the months of pain we both endured in the aftermath. But I can't honestly say I regret where we've ended up, with a marriage that's been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more genuine than it might otherwise have been. Nandine, if I could go back and do it differently, would I tell the truth from the start? Part of me, the part that has embraced honesty as the foundation of our rebuilt relationship, wants to say yes. But another part, the part that understands how fear and insecurity can drive us to desperate measures, recognizes that the person I was then wasn't capable of that kind of authenticity. She was too afraid of rejection, too convinced that her real self was unworthy of love. What I know for certain is this: you can't build a lasting connection on a foundation of lies, no matter how convincing those lies might be. Sooner or later, the truth emerges. And when it does, the real question becomes not whether your relationship can go back to what it was before, but whether something new and authentic can grow from the ashes of what was lost. For Travis and me, the answer has been yes. A qualified, complicated, hard-won yes that continues to unfold day by day. Our story isn't a fairy tale of perfect redemption. It's messier than that, full of backward steps and sideways movements. But it's real. And after everything we've been through, real is exactly what we both need.